In the book, he's still a king. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Faith and thank you so much for watching. So I've decided to start a series on my channel where the last Sunday of each month I talk about a book to film or book to TV show adaptation. So we're going to start that with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I just read the book in May and then me and my best friend watched it a couple weeks ago together. So I'm going to talk about it while they're both still fresh in my mind. And a couple quick disclaimers or clarifications first. I have the US version of the book. This is the version that I read. I have not read the UK version. I know that the US version is set in the US and the UK version is set in the UK. So I don't know of any other differences between the two other than location. So I'm not going to touch on differences like US dialogue versus UK dialogue and US locations versus UK locations because the book was originally written in the UK. I'm not sure why they changed it. So if anything I do talk about today is different in the UK book, I apologize. I didn't read that one. Another disclaimer, I am going to focus more on the differences than the similarities. And because of how many there are, I'm not really going to touch on all of them. I'm going to touch on the big ones or else I'd be talking about this for hours. I'm going to do my best to go in chronological order. No promises though. Most of the points I bring up cover the entire series as a whole. However, there are quite a few individual points that I want to bring up about the ending of the TV show. And lastly, before we jump into it, I have only read the first book. I have not read the second or third. So if there are any differences in the first season of the show that were affected because of books 2 or 3, I do not know that. And please do not comment spoilers if that is the case. By the time season 2 comes out, I will most likely have read the second book and then I will do its own comparison for that. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first point that I want to touch on is the portrayal of Andy in the book versus the show. In the book, Andy was a mean girl through and through. I don't think there's really any argument that you can make against that. And in the show, anytime there was a scene of Andy from the past, she was very nice. Like, I did not get mean girl vibes at all. The show still had her cheat on Sal with the cop and Mr. Ward, so you do still understand that she's really not a good person. But I feel like for the people who didn't read the book, it would have been harder to establish that she is actually a very mean girl, because I feel like it's easy for people to look over things like that when every time you see them, they're, oh, like, hello, I'm so nice and sweet. Like, you know what I mean? But every time we see her in the book, it's very clear that she was not a good person. And speaking of actually getting scenes of Andy, I don't recall any flashback scenes in the book. I know that the book is strictly from Pip's point of view, so that's probably why. Even then, the only real insight we get of Andy in the book is through the interviews. But the flashback scene between Andy and Sal that was shown like a dozen times throughout the whole series was not in the book at all, if I remember correctly. And that scene is really what I mean when I say Andy wasn't very much a mean girl, because that's the biggest insight we get into Andy's character in the show. Her and Sal hugged at the end and parted ways on good terms, and that was the day before she was killed, which really wasn't the vibe we got in the book at all. So I'm not really sure why that flashback scene was added, because to me it honestly did basically nothing. I'm assuming that was put there for multiple reasons. It puts faces to the names, which is always easier for the audience, and it gives us an insight of what their relationship was like, although I don't think it did a good job at that, because in the book their last real conversation together was not that good, at least that was my understanding, but that flashback scene had them parting in a pretty amicable way. And it honestly made it seem like everything in their relationship was fine when we learned in the book that that really was not the case. And Sal was a good boyfriend, so I do honestly think in that flashback his character was portrayed well. I think it was her character that was not. So honestly, I didn't really like that flashback scene, especially it being showed like 15 times. But moving on from that, in the book, when Pip goes and introduces herself to Robbie for the first time, she shows up at his house. But in the show, she was following him down the street. Honestly, I don't really feel one way or the other about that change. It added some movement to the scene where instead it would have just been them both standing in a doorway. I just thought I'd bring it up because, you know, that's two of the main characters being introduced to each other. In the book, romance was a very, 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 very tiny subplot. I don't even think it was really a thing until the end. But in the show, it was a way bigger subplot. And you kind of got the vibe that they liked each other. I think episode 2 or 3. It was very early on, and that kind of went steadily up as the show went on. And as someone who mainly reads romance, I actually really did like that change. But I did really enjoy reading the book where it was focused solely on the mystery aspect. And I think one of the reasons that was added in the show is just to attract a bigger audience, and it just gives some people a bigger incentive to finish the show. You know, people will be like, oh, I want to see how their relationship plays out. And I'm going to touch more on their relationship in a bit. However, now I'm going to switch from romantic relationship to family relationship. The mom was significantly more present in the show than she was in the book. In the book, I think the main parent was the dad because the mom was always away doing some real estate business. Not that in the book she was like an absentee mom, but the dad was just featured more in the book. And in the show, it felt like the mom was featured way more than the dad. And just like the show had more of the romantic subplot, I feel like it also touched a lot more on the family dynamics than the book did, which for the most part I liked. There was only one thing that I didn't, and I will touch on that in a second. I'm not sure why the decision was made to make her be closer to her mom than her dad in the show. At least that's what it felt like. But I love my mom. I love a good mother-daughter relationship. So back to one thing that I didn't like about the family relationship. I love the dad in the book. He is one of my favorite book dads of all time. I did not like how in the show, for part of it, he was painted as a cheater. And obviously, I'm aware that that's not what happened, but there was the little bit where Pip thought that's what happened. But then it turns out her mom and dad just needed a break from each other. I actually did not like that. Again, I don't know if that's important to the second or third book or second and third season, but to me, it really just felt like it added nothing. And I really feel like what we see more of in TV is a broken family relationship than a strong one. And I would have loved to see a strong one portrayed in TV. Not that it's not strong in the show, I just don't like that they added that little bit in there. Because like I said, I loved Pip's dad. And I didn't really like how the show made Pip doubt him for a little bit and made us doubt him for a little bit. In the book, he's still a king. Like, honestly, one of my absolute favorite characters in the book. He was so funny and he was such a good dad. And now moving on from the family relationship, we're gonna jump into the friend relationship. I feel like her friends played a significantly larger role in the show than they did in the book. While I'm talking about this, honestly, it just feels like everyone had a bigger role in the show than they did in the book. Unlike in the show, I feel like her friends were barely in the books. There was a lot more to Kara and Pip's relationship in the show than there was in the book. It felt like there was a lot more tension between them in the show. And I'm not sure if that's because in the book, it seemed very one-sided. Pip was always just worried that Kara would find out about stuff and be mad at her. But then all of their interactions together were fairly civil. And I feel like there were a lot more moments in the show where they weren't necessarily fighting, but there was definitely tension between them because, you know, Pip was interviewing Naomi and Kara didn't want her to. Kara wanted her to just let Naomi forget about everything. Kara is still very clearly her best friend in the show, but I did feel like the rest of their friend group as well was a lot more present in the show. From what I remember, the most time they spend together in the book is when they go camping, and I feel like that scene just lasted a lot longer in the show. That was one of my favorite scenes in the book, so I'm not complaining about that. In the book, it really feels like she interacts with more of the suspects than her actual friends, but it didn't feel like that in the TV show. And while I don't like every single change the show made, I kind of did like that one. Because in the book, I feel that was used to show just how dedicated Pip was to solving the case, but I feel like the show also did a very good job with that while still including her having relationships with all these other people. And while we're talking about friends, let's go ahead and talk about Andy's friends. In the book, Andy has 2 friends. In the show, Andy also has 2 friends. However, in the show, one of her friend's characters was technically cut out and just combined with the character of Nat De Silva. Honestly, this is one change that I really just did not like. In the book, her and Nat are not friends at all. They cannot stand each other. They have a rivalry. Andy literally had a point system in her planner. Andy 1, Nat 0. They very clearly did not like each other. And that change is another reason why I think that Andy was just portrayed as a much nicer person in the show than she was in the book. And again, I just really didn't like that. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Nat was a good person in the books either. However, Andy was significantly meaner than she was, at least in my opinion. In the book, we have Andy's 2 friends and Nat De Silva. I feel like in the show, Nat De Silva wasn't really Nat De Silva. She acted more like Andy's friend that was removed from the show, if that makes sense. And again, the way that Pip goes and interviews her in the show is very different than how it happens in the book. I didn't really mind that change as much. I just still wish she acted more like the Nat De Silva from the book. But then we have Nat's brother, who again was way more significant in the show than he was in the book. He had multiple speaking scenes in the show and he was shown multiple times following around Pip, and that just doesn't really happen in the book. He's more of the background character that, you know, Pip sees in the newspaper, Pip hears someone talking about him, but that's kind of it. Honestly, I can't remember them actually interacting in the book either. If they did, it was only once or twice, but in the show there was the scene where he made her get into his cop car and they had a huge conversation then, which I know does not happen in the book. And honestly, I can't really decide how I feel about that because I feel like it didn't really add much to the story having him be more present, but I didn't write it, so I don't really know their motivations for putting it in there. Okay, now we're gonna get into something that I have more mixed feelings on, and that is the calamity scene. In the book, again, this is the US version, I'm not sure if the UK version is different, but in the US version of the book, it is described more of as a house party, but in the show, it's like this full-on rave underground. Honestly, I can't decide which I liked more because I think both of them suited their mediums very well. In the book, I think the underground rave scene would have been a lot harder to describe and follow along with, but in the movie, I think the house party would have been a lot more boring to watch. So this is one change that I actually did like, and I think that it did suit the show better than a house party would have. So I honestly don't have an opinion on, oh, I liked it in the book better, oh, I liked it in the show better. I like them both equally, honestly. Like, cinematically, the rave scene was really cool. And before you come at me with that, you've clearly never been to a rave. You're right, I haven't. But in my mind, for what were they, 16, 17-year-olds? That is a rave. Sorry, not sorry. I'm gonna call it a rave. But all that being said, I did not like how Howie was at the rave. I liked that scene significantly better in the books. I thought it showed Pip's detective work a lot better in the books as well. And while both made me very uncomfortable, I did feel more tension when watching that scene in the show than in the book. Part of that, though, I feel like is because the actor who played Howie was creepy. And I know I just said that I feel like most characters played a bigger role in the show than they did in the books. I feel like that is the complete opposite for Howie. And honestly, now that I think about it, quite a few of the other suspects, like Andy's dad, very, very, very minimal role in the show. But again, I'll kind of go into that part in a bit just to help follow the timeline of the show better. Honestly, with the Howie scene, I can't decide which I liked better because again, I did feel more tension in the show and I did like that. However, in the books, I did like how during that part, Pip's detective work just shined more, in my opinion. We're gonna move on to a sad, sad part that made me cry when the dog died. I'm gonna be honest, there was a brief minute there where I was like, oh my gosh, they changed it and the dog didn't die. He did. That is another one that I just can't decide which I liked better. I don't like animals dying in general. I don't like anyone dying in general. In the books, having the dog drown, I thought that was really sad. In the show, Andy's sister never really addresses the dog thing. At least not that I remember. They just assume someone hit the dog with the car. And honestly, I can't decide which of those is less dramatic because the drowning thing at least was a private family moment, whereas the dog dying in the street, there were neighbors watching and everything. And I know if my dog died like that, I wouldn't want everyone looking at me sobbing over my dead dog. They are both so unbelievably tragic, though. Please do not get me wrong. I think that the right change would have been to let the dog live. Barney dying actually makes me so sad, so I'm just gonna move right on from that. Touching back on me saying I feel like a lot of the suspects were less important in the show. In the show, Mr. Ward killing Andy kind of came out of left field. They cut out a lot of stuff about him, I feel like. She realizes it was Mr. Ward like the second before she gets in his car, so her whole plan from there on out was literally just a split-second decision, whereas in the book, that actually took a lot of thought. And when she confronted Mr. Ward, he was pretty quick to be like, oh, it was me, I'm so sorry, I feel so bad. But he did try to deny it for quite a bit in the show. And in the book, he was also pretty accepting of it. Like, I remember him sitting down and being like, it's finally come to an end. But again, in the show, he was very adamant, no, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, sir, be for real. I didn't like how they ended episode 6 with Mr. Ward locking her in the attic and then having the rest of the book be one whole episode, because that made most of the last episode very, very inaccurate to what happens in the book. I also didn't like how in the show, the girl who was supposed to be Andy fully knew that she wasn't Andy. In the book, it was a mentally unstable woman, and she did end up fully believing that she was Andy. And again, just jumping back real quick, I also didn't like how her being locked up there was basically pointless because the cops come almost immediately and let her out. And I'm not from the UK, I may have spent 3 months there, but I didn't really interact with the police. So I don't know if it was just, oh, it'd be too inaccurate if the cops showed up and then let her go up to the attic, even though in the book they didn't really let her go. She had to run kind of past them. And it is just a show, it's not reality. But, you know, like I said, I did just like that scene better in the book. And like I just said, I didn't like how the last episode was very different from the book ending. And I know at the beginning I said I'm doing this one now because I recently read and watched it, and so it's still fresh in my brain. Unfortunately, it is not fresh enough, and so the timeline of events is a little bit off. So I can't remember if this happened before or after the Ward thing, but Ravi leaving, I really did not like that. I felt like that was only there to drive the romantic subplot, but still it felt really unnecessary and very un-Ravi-like. And again, sorry if I'm going out of order, I don't fully remember the timeline that well, but then when Pip confronted Andy's sister, I didn't like how they ended up at the cave that the rave was at, because if I remember correctly, in the book, it was literally just in her front yard. And Pip's entire confrontation to her, honestly, just felt very different and not really in a good way. It just took out a lot of stuff, and I apologize because I do think I already said this, but Andy's sister didn't even confess to being the one to kidnap Barney. And actually, going back to Barney for a second, as much as I didn't like that Barney died, I did think it actually had purpose in the book. I did not feel that way in the show. But back to where we were at, Becca gets taken down in the cave scene, and from there on out, nothing is accurate to the books. The book ends pretty fast after that. It ends with Pip doing a speech about her project to her entire school, and that just didn't happen in the show. And I know in the UK version it was different because it was for her EPQ and it was more for her college admissions, whereas this was just for her final for school. So I'm not really sure sure if that's why it was different or if that was even in the UK book. But again, I'm comparing the US book. I actually really liked the ending in the book. I felt like it brought everything together. But in the show, honestly, the whole ending just really dragged on for me. I liked how her and Ravi kissed at the end. I thought that was cute. I'm glad he decided to stay. And while I don't like a lot of the changes that the show made, I am very excited for the second season and very excited to read the second book. And I'm very curious as to what is going to happen because, as far as I'm aware, everything has been solved. Like I said, when the second season comes out, I will have definitely read the second book, so I'm gonna make a separate video on that whenever that will be. In this series, I do want to give the show or movie a rating as to how well it adapted the book, but I honestly just can't think of a rating for this because the show is technically based off of the UK version and I don't know what differences are in the US versus the UK version. I don't want to have this be the only one where I don't rate it, so I am gonna rate it, and I think I'm gonna give it a 5, and that is not based on how much I like it. That is just how accurate I think it was. Low key, I feel like I could go lower. You know what? We're gonna give it a 4.5 out of 10. And again, that is not based on how much I liked either the book or the show. I would give them both better than a 4.5 out of 10. This is solely based on book to show accuracy. And for this one, that is US book to UK show accuracy. If you read the UK versions, maybe they did change less stuff, so your rating might be higher. If you've read the UK version and want to tell me differences or similarities between either the US and UK book or the UK book and the UK show, feel free to do that. Just please, again, don't spoil books 2 or 3. If I accidentally gave any inaccurate information in this, please let me know in the comments. It was not intentional. Like I said, it is still fresh on the brain, but not fresh enough that I remember every detail exactly. And if you haven't read the book or watched the show, honestly, I don't know why you're still watching this, but I recommend them both. I think they're both very good. And like I said, I am making this a series at the last Sunday of each month. So if you have any requests that you want me to do, please let me know. I do have next month's already picked out, and I'll tell you what it is. It's going to be Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is my favorite book and it is my favorite movie. I'm very excited to do that one. But after that, I'm not really sure which ones I'm going to do. So like I said, feel free to leave a request because that's in 2 months. So I will have plenty of time to read the book or watch the movie or show if I haven't seen it. Next week, you guys will get my June reading wrap up. And guys, it's not looking good. It is not looking good. I will say that. I'm really hoping July is better. I think that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope you all have a fantastic day. I hope you're having a great summer. And yeah, love you guys. Bye.